So we're going to jump straight into reptile identification. And these are the 4 species that we're going to be covering today. Okay, so these species that you can see, or at least the names of the species that you can see on your screen, are what we consider the common or widespread species. I have this slash here now because the adder, or the common European adder, is far less common than it used to be. It is still a very widespread reptile throughout the UK, but we have lost huge numbers. So certainly a question mark as to whether it should be considered a common species anymore. Starting off with the common lizard, okay, how to identify the common lizard. Some people actually call this the viviparous lizard. I don't really hear this as much anymore. Viviparity is giving birth to live young. And in fact, many of our UK native species give birth to live young and they don't lay eggs, as many reptiles do worldwide. And this is to do with the fact that we're at the northern range of a lot of reptiles that you'll find throughout Europe. Common lizard, quite a small reptile, so 13 to 14 centimeters, so half a ruler, and half of that overall length is its tail. Okay, so it's only going to be 6 or 7 centimeters, the body length. That is quite a small lizard. It's not the size that you're maybe used to when perhaps you see lizards on your holidays, or if you see them on the David Attenborough documentaries. They're usually big, colourful things. And most people are quite shocked the first time they maybe see a common lizard on how small it actually is. There is a huge range of colour and marking variability when it comes to common lizards. So the only really common feature that we see is that they're usually some shade of brown. Sometimes you'll get dull yellow or green, even dull blue, although that is very rare, but usually some shade of brown. That is how we identify the common lizard. They have a variety of different markings. So if we take a look at this image in the bottom here, we can see a load of yellow and white flecks and spots all throughout the body and along the length of the tail as well. It is really quite difficult to tell the difference between males and females. This is a male we have here in the top left, and we have another male down here in the bottom right. And we normally say males are more spotty or flecky. Okay, females, on the other hand, are more stripy. They have more linear features. So this is a female here in the middle right-hand side image. If you can follow my mouse cursor, we can see quite a solid line running all the way down the back of the female there. This is called the vertebral line. Usually in females, this is far more evident than in the males. Take a look at these male pictures here. You can hardly even tell there's a vertebral line here on this male. It's broken up in quite a lot of places, and there's loads of flecks and dots as well. Perhaps more complete on this male here in the bottom right, but still quite broken up. There's certainly more flecks and dots than on this female. Females also tend to have darker flanks. So the flanks being the sides of the lizard. You can see here on this female, they're black by the looks of it. They can range from black all the way through to dark or light brown, but usually their flanks are a darker colour than the rest of the body. The juvenile lizards, or neonates, as they're called once they've been born, they're born almost jet black. They look melanistic almost, and as they grow older, they get coppery and bronzy in colour. So it only takes 2 or 3 weeks for that bronze and copper coloration to sort of bleed through. But by and large, it's very obvious when it's a juvenile because of that coloration and just the very small size. You may have noticed I've not actually spoken about the image in the bottom left. This is a newt. A newt, if you're unfamiliar with reptiles, is probably the species you're most likely to confuse a common lizard with. They very superficially resemble lizards, but there are a few key differences. The best piece of advice I could give you is to approach whatever you think you found. Lizards are fast, they're skittish, they will not give you the opportunity to get close, particularly if they've managed to warm up in the morning sun. Okay, they will spot you a mile off. They will feel the vibrations through the ground as you approach. Most of the time you won't see them before they see you. Newts, on the other hand, they're not getting away anywhere fast. Okay, newts, very slow and sluggish on land. You can get very close to a newt. You will almost always be able to get up to a newt and pick it up if you wanted to, whereas you won't with lizards. Barring that, the main identifying feature is the difference in the skin. So you can see very clearly the individual scales of the common lizards on every single one of these pictures. So lizards have very scaly skin. Newts have completely smooth skin. And this really is what kind of separates amphibians and reptiles as a taxa. In the amphibians have very smooth and porous skin, whereas reptiles have these hard scoots or scales. You can also count the front toes. Okay, this is something that quite a lot of people tell me. It's more of a fun pub quiz fact than anything else. I don't know of anyone that really has approached lizards or newts in the field and managed to count the toes before they've already identified the species in the first place. But if you do count the front toes of a lizard, you'll find they have 5. If you count the front toes of a newt, you'll actually find that they have 4. So, interesting fact. Moving on to the slow worm. Everyone's favorite fact, the slow worm is actually a legless lizard. So it does share features with lizards that it doesn't share with snakes. So they are lizards that have more recently, along the evolutionary timeline, lost the use of their legs. This is due to them being something we consider semi-fossorial. So semi-fossorial meaning they like to spend a lot of time either underground or within that layer of leaf litter or underneath scrub. They're quite often underneath things, not very often found in the open. And legs, they become very bothersome when you're underground a lot, and as time has passed on, they have lost the use of them. The features they do share with the lizards are having eyelids, so they can blink. Snakes don't have eyelids. That is an identifying feature of any snake. They actually have a scale that is fused together, and that covers their eyelid. Covers their eye, and that scale is actually see-through. They can see through it, and as such, they don't need to clear their lens of any dirt or grime that gets into it. They also have a very distinctive, so slow worms have snakes have a very distinctive head and body. Okay, when you look at the slow worms, if you look at all of these pictures, there's very little distinction between the head and the body. It's almost like they're just one long, thick tube rather than having a distinct head and a distinct body. So a few things you can do to identify it as a slow worm and not a snake. But in terms of it being a lizard, it's much bigger than our common lizard, 35 to 50 centimeters when it's fully grown. Most of the slow worms you find will be a little bit smaller than that. It's only when they've lived a number of years that they get to that sort of size. And in terms of their coloration, it's very reliable to identify a male from a female based on the different colors that you get. This is the female here in the top left, female slow worm. They're stunning looking reptiles. That is bronze, almost golden looking color, quite often speckled with brown and black on top. And every now and again, they will retain that vertebral line that I was talking about that you saw on the common lizards. On this image, you can just about see a line here beginning at the top of the head. And they normally have much darker flanks as well, just like the common lizard. But that contrast between the two different colors really identify it as a female. The males, a bit more uniform in color, not quite as interesting, usually a gray or brown color, but every now and again you'll get a male with these blue flecks on them, like someone's just got a paintbrush and flicked a bit of blue. And that makes up for the fact that their color isn't quite as vibrant. But you don't get that on every male. Okay, so some males will develop fantastic blue coloration like this, but not all males will. Every now and again, you might just find a male with 1 or 2 blotches, and it's very subtle, not quite as prominent as you can see here. The juveniles, they're born live, just like common lizards. They're born about 4 to 8 centimeters in length, so very small, really fantastic golden color with these jet black flanks and this jet black vertebral line as well. So a bit out of focus, but you can very clearly see that line starting at the top of the head, extending down the length of the body. September, and we're approaching September very quickly. It's a great time to go and see reptiles, to go out into your local areas and try and find them, because you will find dozens of neonate slow worms all bunched up together, like slow worm spaghetti underneath a log or a stone or a piece of refugia. Definitely worth your time to go and look for young slow worms. So the grass snake is the first of our snake species, our first common and widespread snake species. They're my absolute favorite, and just based on the size of this reptile. They are the whoppers of the UK reptile repertoire. They have been known to grow up to 1.5 meters. I certainly have never found a snake this large. Usually they're a bit smaller, between 60 centimeters to 1 meter. And the females are usually a fair bit bigger than the males, about 1/3 bigger usually. You won't forget the first time you ever find a grass snake that is 1 meter or so in length. It is a sight to behold. In terms of their identifying features, they are usually a green, dark olive color, but you can see across all 3 of these pictures that green is quite variable. But the main identifying feature is this yellow collar behind the head. Okay, if you can see that yellow collar on a snake that just zips off into the undergrowth, you've seen a grass snake. No other native snake in the UK has that yellow collar, just like the grass snake does. To a lesser degree, you can use these dark black lines or bars along the flanks of the snake as an ID feature, but these can be quite subtle on some individuals, but it is what gives our special species of grass snake, the barred grass snake, its sort of common name. So you may hear people call them barred grass snakes every now and again, and that is based on that feature there. So really clear on this image in the bottom, these black bars lining the flanks. So interestingly, grass snakes have keeled scales. So throughout the snake world, each scale on a snake will either be keeled or non-keeled. And a keel is just a line or a ridge that runs through the middle of each scale. If you are on a computer and not a smartphone, you can actually see each individual line on this bottom picture running through the scale of the grass snake. Okay, so grass snakes have keeled scales, and it is quite difficult to tell the difference between males and females. Okay, and they say look at either end of the snake. Let's examine a female first. This is a female grass snake up here in the top left. They have an arrow-shaped head. Okay, so like the tip of an arrow, that triangular shape. When a snake grows older, that will become more prominent. That is the shape of the female head. It joins the body very distinctly as a triangle onto a long line, whereas a male, I think this is probably a male here, that distinction where it joins the body is far less pronounced. Okay, it's a very skinny head, certainly not triangular in shape, and even though it's far more distinct just based on the scalation patterns than the slow worm looks. So if we look at the slow worm, went forward instead of backwards, very little distinction between the head and the body, especially turns in how the scalation looks, but very, very clear on the grass snake. The males have a skinny head, and the females have that triangular arrow-shaped head. The other thing you can do as well is look at the other end of the snake, the tail. So believe it or not, snakes actually have tails, and they're not just one big long tail themselves. They have a distinct head, body, and tail. And you can sort of see that on a female. Okay, got the body, it's quite thick, and then it tapers off very suddenly about here. If you're taking a guess, that would probably be whereabouts the tail begins on this female. and it's quite short compared to the length of the body. On a male, the tail is much longer, and because of this, it's more gradual when it tapers off. So you can see on this picture here in the top right, you can't really point to where you think the tail starts. The tapering off is so gradual, it's very difficult to sort of estimate where the body stops and the tail begins. So that's the best piece of advice I could give you to sex your grass snakes. Look at the head and look at the tail. But I just want to draw attention to the eye as well. Before I move on to the next slide, we use their eye as an identifying feature from the net species we're going to cover. So in particular, look at the circular pupil and look at the yellow iris. Okay, fix that in your mind and compare it to this. So this is the adder. Okay, this is our last really common and wide species we're going to be covering today. So very, very widespread throughout the UK. And it's a little bit smaller than the grass snake. Okay, so they only really grow to about 60 to 80 centimeters when fully grown, but they're a far stockier snake than the grass snake. So certainly for their size, they look a lot more thick set, a lot chunkier than grass snakes. And you can see that in these pictures here. Going back to the eye, this is used as an identifying feature of the adder. They have these tremendously scary looking eyes with these vertical pupils and these red coppery irises. When you see it, it almost screams, please keep your distance. And you should. They are our only venomous snake, but perhaps that gives them a really undeserved reputation as being dangerous. Okay, they are not particularly dangerous at all. You are more likely to die from a bee sting than you are from an adder bite. And it is a last line of defense, really, for an adder to actually strike out and bite. They are very secretive and very responsive to disturbance. They do not like being disturbed. They slink and slither away to cover, out of sight whenever they are disturbed. Most of the bites that we hear about are snakes when they bite dogs. And dogs are very inquisitive, very curious creatures by nature. They sniff, they pat, they paw, they just will not leave a snake alone. And it's after a few minutes of that, really, that an adder is likely to bite out at a dog. So we just need a little bit of extra interpretation on our sites, and a little bit of the media's sympathy when talking about adders. They are certainly not a dangerous animal. Just keep your dogs on leads where adders are known to be present. But bringing it back into how to identify the adder, taking a look at the eye, we're taking a look at the size, and let's take a look at the markings and the colour. So in terms of markings, there is an unmistakable zigzag pattern running down the length of the body. Okay, this is a great picture down here. You can see that dark zigzag pattern that begins on top of the head of the adder, usually in a sort of upside down V shape. You can see it on this here. You can see it on this adder here as well. So that zigzag pattern can be quite variable. Sometimes it can be very sharp and Z-like. Sometimes it's more wavy and smooth and S-like. But some sort of distinction between that zigzag pattern and the rest of the body coloration. It's a fairly reliable method to sex your adders using the coloration. So here, bottom left, we have a female. They tend to have these dark brown zigzags with these lighter brown body coloration. Okay, so every now and again, you'll find a female with a black zigzag pattern, but they still tend to remain this lighter brown across the body. Males, on the other hand, tend to have black zigzag patterns. In fact, I don't know if any males ever been found with a brown zigzag pattern. It's males that exclusively have a black zigzag pattern, but it's their body coloration, this steely sort of grey, almost silver-like colour that really contrasts with that black pattern. The juveniles, this is a juvenile we have here in the top left. Brick red is how they describe it in the field, with a sort of very similar coloured zigzag pattern. But they are born live, just like our common lizards and slowworms. I forgot to mention that grass snakes are our only native snake that actually lay eggs, and the only one we're covering today that lay eggs. Adders, slowworms, and common lizards all give birth to live young. So they're born quite large, about 20 centimeters in length, with all these features present, so the zigzag and the sort of adder eye. But as they grow older, as they reach sexual maturity, their coloration will develop into either male or female. Okay, so we're just going to talk very briefly about the general seasonal life cycle of a reptile. So what they do all throughout the year. This does depend on the weather, the current weather of that year, and where you are in the country as well. It tends to get warmer a little bit earlier in the south of England, and as you get further north, it's a bit colder. But by and large, they stick to this same sort of life cycle every year. So during the winter months, they're going to be hibernating. Okay, start at the bottom, just to make it simple. So anywhere between October and March, they're going to be hibernating. And they like to hibernate in void spaces. Or anywhere underground that offers them some protection is an excellent place for a reptile to hibernate. They're looking for somewhere that has a stable temperature. It doesn't necessarily need to be warm, but it does need to remain frost-free. They do not like frost. So you get frost when water vapor freezes. So if you have an underground mammal burrow or the underground foundations of a building, water vapor really struggles to get down there. So even if it dips below zero, you're less likely to get frost than if you're on top of the ground. Those are the kind of places that reptiles really like to hibernate. Those sort of crevices and cracks that you don't think twice about. But towards the end of winter, and certainly throughout the start of spring, and even towards the end of spring, depending on the species, they start to leave their hibernation sites. So adders and common lizards tend to leave first, followed by slowworms and then grass snakes. But it's the warm weather that's really going to trigger that response of them coming out of their hibernation sites, their overwintering sites, and for them to begin basking to start their year, really. And this is when all the good stuff happens. Okay, so the end of spring is when we're going to get a lot of breeding between males and females, and they all have very different breeding strategies. And I don't have time to go into that today, but if you're interested, do Google what those strategies are. Just to give you an example, the one that everybody wants to see is the dance of adders, where you actually have two male adders fighting over a female. So they've actually found a female. They may have ranged really long distances to find her, and they will fight for priority to that female. You get different strategies based on the species. Towards the end of spring and the start of summer, they have finished their breeding procedures, and they've eaten probably to raise their energy levels. And it's most likely the females that give birth to live young that you will see when you're out and about. Okay, so they want to give their young the best chance of life, and they want to bask in all the best places, make sure that they are developing their young at a very stable temperature. And towards the middle of summer and the end of summer, you get less activity from reptiles. So throughout the months of July and August, it's very difficult to see reptiles because it's usually warm enough that they don't need to bask very long at all. You will still see them, but you probably won't see them quite as often as you might during the sort of March to May period. And it's the middle of summer, or certainly towards the end of summer, that you will get egg laying and live birth. So obviously egg laying happens a little bit earlier because the eggs actually need to incubate. But towards the end of summer, so round about now, August, September, you're going to get a lot of live young reptiles and newly hatched out reptiles. And there is this flurry of activity where you have a lot of juveniles and you have a lot of adults looking to feed as much as possible, really to put on as much weight as they can to survive the overwintering period. And then the cycle continues. Okay, back to hibernation, and then back out again the following spring. Moving on to how to survey for reptiles. Okay, so we know how to identify them. How do we actually go out and about and actually see them? Most people haven't seen reptiles. The average person off the street, if you ask them if they've seen a reptile in this country, they'll probably say no, because they're very secretive animals. And it's really good to understand certain things about reptiles that we can then exploit to go and survey for them, to actually go out and find whether they're present. And the main thing we need to learn is how they thermoregulate. So thermoregulation is just the process by which any species, any animal really manages their temperature within their preferred range. Reptiles are ectothermic, so they do it a little bit different to us. They use the environment primarily to manage their temperature. Endotherms, like me and you, we use more internal processes than reptiles do. Okay, so a UK's reptile temperature, preferred temperature range is between 25 and 30 centigrade. So by no means cold-blooded, and that's only about, 5 centigrades cooler than perhaps humans want to be. They certainly don't want to be cold. They want to be warm. So they bask to get up to this temperature. Okay, they do this by just sitting in direct sunlight or really warm places until their temperature is round about in this range. And then they'll go off and do whatever they have planned for that day. It's common lizards, grass snakes, and adders that tend to bask in direct sun. They're what we call heliothermic. Slow worms are a little bit different. They don't bask as openly as the other three. They like to sit underneath hot things. Okay, something like a compost heap. Produces a lot of warmth from all that rotting vegetation. They'll quite happily sit on top of it and warm up that way. They're something we call thigmothermic. So they don't bask in open sun quite as much, but they will do every now and again. You will find one out in the open. But they still have to use their environment to get to their preferred temperature range. And knowing this, we can conduct a visual survey and identify the right conditions that a slow worm is going to be basking so that we can go out and see them. And that's really all a visual survey is when it comes to reptiles, identifying the best time to go out and see reptiles. Secondary to that, you really need to identify what suitable habitat areas there are, but reptiles actually occupy a very wide range of habitats. They don't really depend on certain species, so they don't care about the vegetative composition, they care about the structure of vegetation. So you'll find them across many, many different habitats as long as there is a wide range of vegetation structure. You can also set a transect. It's really good practice if you're familiar with transects. A transect is just starting at point A, ending at point B, and as you travel that route, actively looking for your survey species. You don't always have to do this. You can just go to a site and have a jolly around the site and still conduct a visual survey. But by and large, it's really good to get yourself on Google Satellite or something with a habitat map and sort of plan your route around where you're going to do your visual survey. But the when. Okay, so identifying the right time and weather conditions, this is the meat of it. This is what we need to be able to do. When do we go out and survey? Reptiles are going to be active any time between February and October. You can see reptiles throughout any month of the year. You get reports of adders that are sometimes active in the middle of December if it's a particularly warm day. If you want to go out and do a visual survey between these months, there is a chance that you might find a reptile. However, The months between March and May, and then again in the same year, September and October, are going to be the best times for reptiles. That is when they're most active. Okay, those are the best months. In terms of the best time of day, you really need to tailor this to the weather. So when it's quite cool, like early on in the year, perhaps February and March, you perhaps can afford yourself a lie-in and you can go out a little bit later. You will probably find them basking towards 11 a.m. all throughout the day. Okay, think of those cold, crisp February days when the sun, even though it's shining, takes a long time to heat up. Those are the days you want to get out early on in the year. You probably want to survey beginning at 11 and maybe finishing in the early afternoon. In the middle of summer, like we are now, unfortunately, you're going to have to get up very early and you're going to have to get out with the sun. The reptiles are going to come out first thing in the morning when the sun is still very warm at this time of year. And then they're out, they're gone. Okay, they'll finish basking by about 10 or 11, as long as the sun is warm enough. On those hot days, you can actually go back out again in the evening, so say between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. and you might find them basking in the slow heat of the day to really maintain that temperature range. In terms of the actual temperature range of the day, anywhere between 9 to 18 centigrade, it's going to be a good shout to head out and do a visual survey. Anything cooler than that, they'll probably not be interested in basking, as it would just leave them exposed for far too long. Anything warmer than that, they actually don't need to bask openly in order to get to their preferred temperature range, as the ambient temperature will just help them do that. When things are a little bit cooler, so earlier on in the year, you want that bright sunshine like I was just talking about. In the middle of summer, when it's much warmer, those hazy, cloudy days where they don't get any direct sun are going to offer you the best bet on seeing a reptile. And I always like to think it was one of the smartest decisions I made, specializing in reptiles, because it is a completely valid excuse to not go out in the rain and in the wind, because you're just unlikely to see reptiles. They do like basking in open sun. So by all means, you need to go out and do reptile surveys when you get the chance, when it's warm, when it's sunny, and then you can stay indoors when it's rainy. That's perfectly valid. The exception to that being that classic April shower weather, where you get a little bit of sun followed by a little bit of rain, and a little bit of sun, and then a bit more rain. During those sunny intermissions, you will actually get reptiles quite active. And this is because they tend to do most of their activity in sort of March, April, and May, and they don't want to let any good sun go to waste. In terms of identifying suitable habitat, like I say, they occupy many, many different habitat types. And the only places you won't tend to find them are highly urbanized areas, with the exception of slow worms, because you will find them on vegetable plots and allotments, as well as intensively farmed agricultural land. You tend not to get reptiles across huge areas of crops. But here's a good place to start. So a long list of places that would offer a really good opportunity to see reptiles. I'm not going to list them all, but just to point out a few. Heathland is always excellent. Heathland offers everything a reptile might ever need in its life. But look at places that have south-facing banks that are going to offer them a lot of sun. Anywhere with a lot of good vegetation as well. So how do you do your visual survey? We know when we want to go out, so when in the year and when in the day. We know how to identify the reptiles. How do you actually go about the physical act of the survey? it's really just taking a walk. There's not much more to it than that. You do have to walk probably a little bit slower than you're used to. And it's where you scan that is the art of the visual survey. If you take away anything from tonight, take away this. Look in between habitats. Look at the habitat interfaces. So where you get short grass meeting scrub, where you get the path margins meeting the grass or the heather or whatever habitat you're on. It's the habitat interfaces that you will find the most activity from when it comes to reptiles. They really like being at the edges of things. Okay, that's where you want to be training your gaze. That's where you want to be looking. And you do have to scan ahead, maybe a meter, a couple of meters ahead of you. And they are quite small, so it is difficult. And you just get better at it over time. You do have to tread relatively lightly. So that means you can't really be stomping through waist-height vegetation. You've got to find somewhere that your footsteps aren't going to cause too much disturbance. Keep your shadow behind you. It means you're not going to scare off reptiles. And if you're looking into your shadow on a warm day, sorry, a sunny day with the bright sun and lots of bright lights, it's really difficult to see into your own shadow. So keep your shadow behind you if possible. Do listen for movement. You will hear common lizards in particular scuttle off before you see them. Might be a mouse, might be a bird, but if you take 2 or 3 steps back, and if you know where you heard the noise from, common lizards are very much creatures of habit, and they will quite often go back to the exact spot that you scared them off from, and you'll be able to see them again. Okay, so if you listen for movement, keep an eye out, you still might be able to see a common lizard. Patience is the key attribute to a good reptile surveyor. You need to be patient and you need to be persistent. You probably won't see reptiles every time you go out on a visual survey. That's just how it is, unfortunately. So don't be deterred. Just be persistent. Keep going out, keep looking for reptiles. And I assure you, you will find them. You will be surprised at some of the places that you will find them. And do look out for dumped refugia. So by refugia, I mean any old piece of trash. So we can see here a common lizard perched on top of a rusty old tire. That's the sort of thing I mean. Look out for these tires, look out for these road signs, any old plastic sheeting that you could look underneath. There might be reptiles using it because they usually heat up really nicely in comparison to their surrounding environment. So use these on your transects if you have access to them. Bins or binos can be useful. Scanning 2 or 3 meters ahead of you can be difficult. So you can just move 2 or 3 meters, get your bins out, look along your habitat interface, see if you can spot anything, and then move on, rinse, repeat. I'll show you a picture of what mosaic basking is in the next few slides. And I've mentioned, yeah, common lizards usually back to the same spot. I love visual surveys. I think they are excellent. They're accessible to everyone. You just need a 1-hour talk and you can go out and do them the next day. You don't need any equipment. You don't need permission as long as you have access to that site. And to tell you the truth, most herpetologists, so reptile ecologists, will tell you the mark of a good herpetologist is being able to spot reptiles without using refugia. By just going out on a visual survey and finding reptiles, that is what really marks some people as excellent herpetologists. So get out there and practice it. However, there are a few downsides. It ain't so good at finding slow worms. You will very unlikely come across a slow worm that's basking out in the open. You're very likely to find them underneath things. So if you don't have refugia, and that doesn't have to be dumped human waste, that can be logs, that can be stones, you know, brash piles, compost heaps. you can incorporate these on your visual surveys. Okay, take a look underneath things. If you don't have these, you won't be very good at finding slow worms. As well as that, you cannot really rely on a visual survey to determine absence. You might just be unlucky. You might go to a site a dozen times over the year and you won't have seen a reptile. But that doesn't mean they're not there. Okay, using specific artificial cover objects, of which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, is a far better process for determining absence of reptiles on a site. And if you're looking to do something scientific with your data, visual surveys aren't great. Your survey results between surveyors, so different people doing the survey, aren't comparable because people have different abilities. And to some degree, they're not comparable within the same surveyor. You're going to get better at a visual survey over time. The more you go out and look for reptiles, the better you become at it. So you will see more reptiles over time. It might only be that you're getting better at spotting them. It's not down to any sort of management practice or any sort of difference in terms of the reptile population. It's just your surveys are getting better. Visual surveys get harder and harder throughout the year as well. Towards the end of summer, you will almost definitely need refugia to find reptiles because you've got grass really high, you've got scrub, you just have a wealth of vegetation that you will not be able to see the reptiles in. So certainly towards the end of summer, it becomes very difficult to see reptiles using this method. Right. What I have done is I put together a collection of pictures from some of my site visits, and we're going to pretend we're there and that we're doing a visual survey. And I just want to point out one or two things that I think you should be doing and that perhaps are going through my mind as well. So here we've got fantastic reptile habitat. This looks like heathland to me. We've got patches of heather here, and maybe patches of gorse, some regenerative woodland. We've got a real mix of structure here. And if I was here in this image, I would be looking at the habitat interfaces. So I'd be checking along where these clumps of heather are and where it meets this bare ground. Okay, I'll be looking around all these edges, all these nooks and crannies that reptiles are going to creep out, get into that direct sunlight. Okay, I wouldn't be looking in the middle of this grass bit here. It's the edges of these clumps of heather and the gorse and the trees. That's where I'd be looking. Got some more heathland here, but it's far more blanketed than the heathland in the previous picture. So I wouldn't be going into the middle of here looking for reptiles. Okay, I'm looking for the edges of habitat. And the edges of paths make really good habitat interfaces. Perhaps can't see that too clearly here, but there's actually a path here that cuts these two pieces of heather in half, these two parcels of heather. That's where I'd be looking. Okay, I'd be walking up this path, checking on either side to see if I can spot a reptile. Paths make great habitat interfaces if they aren't too well used. You do need to be careful not to use paths that there is a lot of footfall on, particularly if you get dogs. If you get a lot of dogs using paths, you just won't find reptiles on either side. Look for places with varied height structure. We want something like this. Okay, we've got bare patches of ground, we've got short grass, medium grass, nice little bits of scrub. It looks like at the back there, we've got woodland. That's going to provide all the best places for reptiles to thermoregulate. So when you're looking for somewhere to start your visual surveys, go for somewhere that has varied vegetation. Again, just another picture of an edge of a habitat. Dry stone wall here. Excellent place for them to hibernate in. I'd be looking at the edge of that stone wall here where it meets the danker vegetation. Perhaps later on in the year when they've moved away from the stone wall, their overwintering site, I might be looking along this edge here. And this is something I would call a green lane. So a pathway or a walkway that is vegetated These are excellent. Greenways or green paths are really excellent places to walk along and look for reptiles. So areas with sunlight. Okay, south-facing banks are often what we call reptile hotspots, where you get a disproportionate amount of reptile activity on a site just due to how good it is for reptiles to thermoregulate. So if you know sites that get good sunlight early on in the morning, close to somewhere with some shelter, like some scrub or longer grass, go and do a reptile visual survey there. There's a good chance you'll find them. And here's mosaic basking. Adders love to do this. They might just expose part of their body. This is really zoomed in. If you were 2 or 3 meters away from this, it's not hard to imagine how difficult it would be to actually see. And here is exactly where we'd expect adders to be basking, in an open area. And quite often they will bask communally, particularly early on in the season, but right next to some vegetation or some scrub at the back here, that when they're disturbed, they have access to, and they'll be able to slither off, hopefully without any issues. Common lizards may be higher up, so they do climb log piles. I've seen them climb fencing to get to the top of the fencing and sit in the sun. So you do have to maybe raise your eyes from ground level a little bit if you're looking for common lizards. And grass snakes are usually found near water. They're amphibian specialists. They like to eat newts and frogs. They will actually take fish sometimes. So you will very much find them in places that have good water, so good ponds, good small lakes. Quite often you'll find them in the water. You can see a grass snake here just poking his cheeky head out. Keep your eye on the ponds, particularly later on in the year when females are traveling large distances to find places to lay their eggs, and perhaps the adults will be actively hunting as well. And it is a sight to behold, watching a snake swim across a pond. It's fascinating to watch. When you are doing your visual surveys, I would recommend using our Dragon Finder app. This takes all the pain out of creating a biological record. No longer do you need to take out pen and paper, record where you saw everything with a grid reference, when you saw it, and inevitably not put it into a computer or send it off to the right people when you get back home. Okay, you can do it at the press of a button. You can download it on the Play Store or the App Store. It's got quite a few other features as well, so you can, there's a lot of identifying information for not only reptiles but amphibians. And you just click this report button, you tell them who you are, you tell it what you've seen. You can upload a photograph if you want as well, though it's not always necessary. And it takes a snapshot of where you are and when it was. That gets sent to us and we can use that data. We really love getting this data. It helps us identify where amphibians and reptiles might need a little bit of help. It helps us put together funding bids for projects just like this one. And we make this data publicly accessible as well. So we aren't the only ones that benefit from it. Any member of the public or any conservation body can access data that's sent through this app and use it for the greater good. And this really is what this webinar and my project is all about. We really need your help. So please use the information that you've hopefully learned today to carry out perhaps 2 or 4 reptile surveys in your area. So choose a local green space near to you and send us any survey results that you might gain on Dragon Finder. Okay, that's going to help us build up a picture of how reptiles are doing. Right, we're now going to do an ID quiz. I hope you were all listening at the start. I hope you've not all switched off. I didn't warn you. Perhaps I should have warned you. I have access to a poll. So I'm going to throw up an image on the screen and then a poll will come up alongside the image. And I want you to try and identify the species. You may be able to identify the sex of the species as well. Sometimes there won't be enough information, but if you can, I want you to try guess the sex. Okay, I'll give you about 30 seconds, 30, 40 seconds, 30 to 40 seconds per image. And there's 8 questions in total. What do we have here? Number 1. So hopefully the poll has appeared on your screen. It is completely anonymous, by the way. I can't see what you've guessed. No one else will be able to see what you've guessed. But I will share the answers at the end. It just comes up as a percentage of what people voted. And we'll see whether you've been listening or not. But please, yeah, don't worry that you'll be exposed if you were perhaps not paying attention. Okie doke, I'm going to end that there. Excellent. 96% of people got this as an adder, which is the correct answer. So we can see the zigzag pattern. Okay, zigzag pattern. Just about see that red, very dark red iris on this one. Vertical pupil is a little bit obscured, but it's that zigzag pattern that gives it away as the adder. So a bit of a split here between male and female. 74% of people think this is male, and I would agree with them. I think the black zigzag pattern suggests this is male. Bit not quite as steely, silvery grey as the first image I showed you, but still quite, you know, greyish in colour. Okay, which I think probably identifies that as male. So well done to everybody that got that right. Moving on to number 2. There we go. Poll is up. 30 to 40 seconds. What do we have here? Give you 5 more seconds. Get your answers in. Right, I'm ending there and I'm sharing. Fantastic. Most of you have got this as common lizard. That's exactly what I want to see. Common lizard. It's the only one I've been through today that has limbs. Okay, and we can very clearly see a leg here. So that is a common lizard. But other features, you can see the scaly skin. We can see that overall brown coloration. You can actually see a line here. The darker flanks as well. So for those of you that said female, I think you're right. I think this is probably a female common lizard based on that darker flank coloration to the rest of the body. So well done for everybody that got that. Moving on to number 3. What do we have? Ten seconds. There we go. I love this picture. I think it is an excellent picture for showing off all the features of a grass snake. So well done to everyone that got grass snake. We can see the olive coloration. We can see the dark bars on the flank. We can see that yellow collar behind the head. And we can see those very innocent looking eyes as well. So that black circular pupil with the yellow iris behind it. Normally you won't see all of those features, by the way. Most of the time you'll see a flash of something and you'll just have to do your best to try and identify what species you've got. I would agree here that there's not enough information. So for those of you who said there's not enough information on the sex here, I don't know. I would hazard a guess that this is male. Looks relatively small. From what I can see, the head looks relatively slim, but I can't see the tail. Okay, and I'd really like to see the tail and whether there's that gradual tapering off of the body to the tail that you would see in a male. I think this is, I would say not enough information, but if I hedged my bets, it would be towards male. Ooh, just relaunching the poll. There we go. Number 4, what do we have? Okay, and it's okay, 100% correct. Well done. I should have expected this, working with Froglife friends. Everyone knows their stuff. I'm going to find it very hard to catch you out, having only gone through 4 species, but you're well done. This is a slow worm. This catches a few people out. So if you know, I do this training with people that have never seen a reptile, never learned much about reptiles. They do struggle with this sometimes, because there's some obscurity over some of the sort of features. But you know, this is a slow worm. Here's the head. You can just about see it in the shadow here. Very little distinction between the head and body. Overall shiny appearance because of those very smooth scales that they have. Well done to everyone that gets female. It's a really high proportion of you got female here, which is bang on. And it's the contrast between the flanks and the body that give it away. Moving on to number 5. There we go. Okay. Oh, possibly caught one person out here. This is, in fact, a newt. And this is a question we get a lot of, actually, at Froglife. When we get pictures sent into us, is this a common lizard? Is this a newt? It looks like people here really do know their stuff. So it's the skin that really gives it away. Smooth skin. You can't see any individual scales. I wonder if any of you counted the front toes. I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, well done if you did. It's an identifying feature that is available in this photograph. But this is indeed a newt, and I certainly wouldn't be able to guess the sex based on this. And this looks like a young newt, which would make it very difficult to tell the species of this newt. It's what we would call a small newt. So either a smooth newt or a palmate newt. Well done, and everybody who got that right. Moving on to number 6. And the poll is up. What do we have? Excellent. So the majority of you got adder. We can see a real robust looking female here. Definitely female. Okay, so well done to everyone that got female as well. That brown coloration on the body, dark brown zigzag pattern. The zigzag pattern gives it away as adder. It's the brown colored zigzag pattern that gives it away as female. So congrats to everyone that got that right. And we're moving on to our second to last image. So this is the penultimate ID image. What have we got? Excellent. Most of you got slow worm. That's exactly what I want to see. Shiny overall appearance. Very little distinction between the head and body. Well done on everyone that got male as well. So male, uniform color, usually brown or gray. You can actually see a few blue dots on it as well. Just a few, which definitely make it a male. So well done on that. And we've got our last image coming right up. Here we are. What reptile do we have? Thank you for your votes. Again, 92% grass snake. So well done on everyone that got grass snake. This is indeed a grass snake. Olive green coloration. You can just about see the yellow color there. You can see the black bars as well, but no zigzag pattern, so it's certainly not an adder. And I would actually use the habitat of the picture as well. It looks like this individual is about to go into that pond. The majority of the time you see a snake swimming, it's going to be a grass snake. They're just very, very happy in the water. So you can use, what the animal's doing to help you ID it as well. I would agree with people that have said not enough information on this. I think, I can't tell. Based off the size of this, I would say female, but it might just be a large male, a very old male that's got to a grand old age and has just continued to grow throughout his lifetime. So I wouldn't say with any certainty that it was a male. I would say not enough information, sorry, female, but just based on the size, I would suggest it was a female. But well done. I mean, I think we have 90+% getting it right every single time. So you know your stuff. That's great. You've got no excuse. You've got no excuse to get out there, go and identify your reptiles, and send us absolutely mountains of data on what you've seen out there. But no, resounding well done to everybody for that quiz. And that brings us to an end of the workshop. So I just want to thank our funders, the National Lottery Heritage Fund. They do a fantastic job of funding some really great projects throughout the UK. So thank you to those guys, and thank you to everyone that does play the lottery for contributing towards that funding. If you want to further support our work, by all means, please visit our website. You can donate. You are already Froglife friends, or at least some of you are in the chat, I know. So thank you. It is an absolute pleasure to deliver something like this to not only people that support such a fantastic organization, but people we know really care for amphibians and reptiles throughout the UK, and that want to do a little bit more for UK conservation. So thank you ever so much. By all means, do visit these links if you do want to become a friend, or if you want to support us a little bit further. But by no means feel like you need to. Just going to answer a few questions. So thank you to everybody that did send me a question ahead of time. It gave me sufficient opportunity to Google your questions, so I didn't look daft answering any questions I might not know the answer to. But we've got some really interesting questions. I've got one or two here. But if you have any questions based on the webinar I've just delivered, please do post them into chat. And a couple of my colleagues will repeat them to me after I finish the questions I've got written down here. Or keep hold of it and turn on your microphone at the end, and we can have a conversation and you can ask me over the mic. But a really interesting one was, what is the northernmost distribution of the common and widespread species, so the UK reptiles? Common lizard, slow worm, and adder are all very widely distributed. So you will find them all the way to the top of the Scottish mainland. Some of them might be on a few of the Scottish islands, but by and large, the islands, so the Hebrides, the Inner and Outer Hebrides, the Shetland Islands, are absent when it comes to reptiles. Grass snakes, on the other hand, aren't particularly well distributed. They're very much concentrated in the southeast of England, but they're very common throughout all south of England. As you get further north, they become scarcer and scarcer. And this is due to the fact that they need to lay eggs. And they need to lay eggs in very specific places that maintain a steady temperature. If anyone's ever been to a summer holiday in Scotland, they'll know they're not guaranteed warm weather. So it just becomes very difficult, the further north you go in the country, to find the right places to lay their eggs. They were only officially actually identified in Scotland, this grass snakes, this is, in 2012. So it's very, very recently that they've been found in Scotland. Someone did send an email through on how to sex juveniles without quite extreme examination, so invasive examination. It would be very difficult to tell. Most juveniles won't develop any sort of dimorphism until they're at sexual maturity. So usually 2 to 3, maybe even 4 years until they reach sexual maturity. And that's when you might see a few of the features that you would associate with male or female, depending on the species. It's really difficult to tell the difference between males and females when they're young. Are there any questions from chat? Were there any questions in chat that need?
Yes, we've got a couple of
answered?
questions.
Excellent.
The first one is, how long do reptiles live?
It varies. There's no straight answer to that. There is a very, very high mortality rate in the first year. So around 80% of reptiles won't survive their first year. That is the most treacherous time to be a reptile. They're more likely to be predated on because dispersal happens very young. And it's the first winter, okay, that first hibernation that will kill off many, many, many young. If they can survive that first hibernation period, they give themselves a far better chance at life. If they survive that first year, common lizards will probably live to maybe 6 years if they're not predated on, so if they're not in an area where a lot of things want to eat them. Adders and grass snakes might live a little bit longer than that, so 8 to 10 years. Slow worms can live really long. They can live up to 30 years. I imagine a 30-year-old slow worm in the wild is a very, very rare occurrence. But certainly when they've been in captivity, they can live up to 30 years. So it depends. If something eats them early on, or if they don't survive their first hibernation period, they don't last long. Hopefully that answers your question.
Lovely, thank you. And the next one is there a danger when lifting refugia of being bitten by an adder?
I imagine it's a small risk, but it is a risk, yeah. I would certainly consider wearing a leather gauntlet. That will probably be enough. Or using a sturdy stick to lift a piece of refugia if you know adders are in the area. I imagine even if you disturb an adder and your hand is very close, the first thing it is going to do is slither away. But why take that risk if you can very easily protect against it? So yes, there is a small risk, but it's not huge.
And that's all the questions so far.
Great.
We've got quite a few comments, but that's the end of the questions from the chat box.
Excellent, thank you. Does anybody want to ask any questions through the microphone?
Yeah, could I just ask, where we live, I know there's an area that's likely to be topped soon, so it's going to be cut. It's fairly long grass. I'm sure I've seen slow worms there, and I have found in previous years a sort of dead young grass snake. So is there anything, if you know that someone's going to come in and has got to do that, if you went, basically if you went stomping around in there for a bit, is that likely to make anything move out of the area in an effort to try and avoid them getting chopped?
It would, so stomping around and making a bit of noise will probably deter adders, grass snakes and common lizards. They will probably move on. Slow worms don't mind disturbance as much as long as they're hidden. So the best piece of advice I could give you is try and encourage whoever's cutting the grass to cut it as late on in the season as possible.
Yeah.
So we recommend winter is the best time. That's not always possible. So we then recommend mowing or cutting later on in the day when it's warmer, so reptiles are more mobile, and hopefully the noise and the ground vibration is going to scare them off. I mean, they're probably not going to be, so slow worms are going to be underneath things, right? They're going to be underneath rocks and stones, and these places aren't going to be cut. It's the grass that's going to be cut. So hopefully, yeah, I mean, stomping it around does help. So you will scare off some things, but try cut later on in the day and they'll be more active, so they're more likely to move on.
So you're talking sort of in the afternoon or late morning?
Yeah, so I would say any time after sort of 1 o'clock is probably the best time to mow, so that the reptiles are given the best opportunity to move on.
Okay, lovely.
Yeah.
All right, thanks very much, Ben.
You're welcome.
Okay, Ben, we've got another question. Are there any particular habitat management tips you have for reptiles? I suspect maybe better pick a habitat unless Vaughan has one in mind. Maybe garden habitats found in gardens?
So the number one piece of advice I would give is you need varied structure. Okay, and you don't want very neat parcels of it. You want a mosaic. So you want some open areas. You want some short grass, some long grass, some scrub, some open woodland, and you want them all mixed in together. If you can't really afford that, so if you do have, say, huge areas of wildflower meadow that will never really have great structure, get log piles in. Get piles of logs and dot them around the edges of your meadows, and that will add the structure that the vegetation can't really provide. But honestly, that's the best piece of advice I could give anyone. It's just improve the structural variance of your vegetation. And it's not just great for reptiles, it's great for a whole host of other species as well, including amphibians.
And talking of amphibians, what's your favourite species of UK newt? Is the next question.
Oh yeah, the cresty, without a doubt. They are stunning, and the male, of course. That the great crested newt is just, it's just stunning. there's no other way to say it. That's my favourite amphib, or newt. And
a question that there's got a lot of adders in the northeast in Durham, but only ever see the males. So David is wondering if there's any reason for this. Yeah, that's completely standard. The females are what we consider very vagile, so they don't move around a lot.
the males will move throughout their environment quite a lot to find females. The female adders are so lazy, maybe not the best term, but they just overwinter. They'll maybe just move 2, 3, 4, 5 meters away from their overwintering site, and they'll wait quite happily until a male finds them. And if they want to breed that year, they will allow it to happen. They will then not move from that spot for 3 or 4 months whilst they develop their young. They won't eat, they will just bask, and they hope to God that no predator finds them. It's only when they've given birth that they will then perhaps move on to find something to eat. But by and large, adders are just sit and wait predators. They're more likely to just wait in one place until a small mammal crosses their path, will strike out, and then they'll follow the scent trail to wherever it died. Chances are that female will go back to the same spot she overwintered in the previous year. So she might stay within a 10 meter squared box for the majority of her life. They really don't move very, very often. So it's absolutely normal to see more males than females, I would say. Yeah. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Any more questions? We haven't got any more in the chat box just now. Anyone else got any other questions? Oh, here we go. Which creatures return to the same? Not sure if that's a question. It says, which creatures return to the same breeding site?
Same breeding site. I mean, reptiles are very poor colonizers, so they tend to stay in one place throughout. If it affords them everything they need, they'll stay there. Okay, the majority of dispersal happens at birthing or hatching. So they will breed. I think that was the question. They'll breed in the same area year after year after year, as long as everything they need is there. It's very rare for any reptile really to range huge distances.
Okay, I think that's it.
Excellent.
May I have a question?
Absolutely.
First of all, I'm sorry about my English. It's not my first language. But I would like to ask you about gaining experience when it comes to being a herpetologist. I just finished my bachelor's degree in ecology, and I'm starting my master's course in endangered species conservation in September. And I see it's really hard to find any experience or to get any experience, because it's usually paid for work and it's really expensive, or it's just really competitive. What do you suggest I could do to make myself stand out to employers?
First off, your English is excellent.
Thank you.
Better than mine by the sounds of it. The number one thing I would say is you do need to look for a volunteering opportunity. I think a lot of employers will get many applications for certainly an entry-level role, and what they're really looking for is commitment and passion. So if you can say, yes, I've done my master's, but alongside my master's, I was able to volunteer for whoever, whichever is the nearest volunteering organization to you. So there's so many different conservation charities out there. There's Froglife, there's us, there's the Wildlife Trust, there's the RSPB, there's the National Trust. Google them and find out which ones are near you, and persistently nag the staff for a volunteering opportunity. And you'll find some people that will more than happily provide that volunteering opportunity for you. I don't know many people that work in conservation without that volunteering opportunity. So, rightly or wrongly aside, that tends to be how most people set themselves aside in terms of getting into this line of work.
Yeah, well, the problem is I'm not from the UK. and it's really hard finding any organizations that focus on frogs or snakes or lizards whatsoever. So I have 2 months of volunteering experience, and it was really hard to find it. So I just wanted to ask if online volunteering counts as well, because I've been volunteering with Frog Songs, which is online, and you have no sign nothing, so nobody actually knows you're doing it. But you identify frog calls.
Mhm.
Does it count, or is it just, you know?
Certainly, I mean, anything you do off of your own back is always going to count. But certainly working with people on the ground is always going to add something a little bit extra. I mean, my email address is here. I'd recommend dropping me an email.
Okay.
What we could do is we could take a look at the area that you're in and where to find the right people to contact. We have limited reach at Froglife. We only work in certain areas of the country, but there is a network of amphibian and reptile groups, which is a very grassroots organization that look to get people involved in amphibian and reptile volunteering. And we'll look to hook you up with them, and they will more than likely support the work that you're looking to get.
Okay.
Hopefully, it does depend on where you are in the country. I do sympathize with that, but there's usually some sort of organization that you'll be able to attach yourself to.
Yeah, I will be actually moving to Nottingham in September for my master's degree. So I've been trying to reach out to the Wildlife Trust, but I haven't heard back from them yet. Well, it's been 6 months, so I doubt I will hear from them anytime soon. So if you have anything I could do around Nottingham, it would be awesome.
Yeah, so I graduated from Nottingham as well. So I'm very familiar with some of the work they're doing. There's definitely some reptile things that you can get on with. I think this is going to be better if you just email me, because this could be quite a long conversation.
Okay,
so
thank
if
you
you're
very
happy
much.
with that, I think we'll leave that there. But
Okay,
do
thank
get in
you.
touch with me, and I'll certainly help you. I'll certainly hook you up with the right people.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Excellent. Do we have any closing remarks for the webinar?
I think I'm supposed to give a closing and thank everybody on time.
Yes, please.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much, Ben, for such an interesting and fascinating talk. And I've actually learned a lot as well about our reptile species. So I think it's been brilliant. Thank you so much to all our friends who have attended. As Ben has already said, if you're not already a friend and you would like to support our work, please do visit our website and support us. And you can attend the next webinar free. And you get loads of other benefits from being a friend of Froglife. Also, of course, you are conserving amphibians and reptiles. Other than that, if you can please fill out the feedback forms that will be sent to you. As Ben said, we are reliant on our donors to fund this sort of work, but this project is particularly funded by National Lottery Heritage Fund and their players. And we really do need to show that we get really good feedback. But if your feedback's not good, please do still give it to us, but make it constructive. Okay, great to see you all. Hope to see you at the next webinar. And again, thank you, Ben. That was an absolutely fantastic talk. Bye all.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.